our Carolyn McAllister is our new co-vice president this season. And I'd have to say she set a land speed record getting oh, sorry about that. Got it. Yeah. Okay, Zoom audience, this is Carolyn McAllister, our co-vice president.
So I'm not going to spend a whole long time introducing our speaker tonight. I think everybody here knows Kent Fiala, and I'm thrilled that he's going to be here as someone who's still trying to learn how to use eBird. I'm hoping he will advance the ball for that tonight. And in fact, yesterday I got one of Kent's sweet little emails. I was on Lake Lynn and saw the gray lag geese. There were 3 of them, and I was excited and wrote them down. I knew they were domestic, but I didn't notice that there's 2 choices. There's gray lag goose and there's gray lag goose domestic, but I didn't pick the domestic, so I got a suggestion that that's what I should do. So I think probably everyone here, except maybe the very most experienced birders, have gotten one of those sweet emails. So thanks, Kent, for being here tonight. Kent is a lifelong birder. He is the webmaster really for both New Hope Audubon and the Chapel Hill Bird Club. And he's going to share his expertise on eBird above the beginner level tonight. Yeah.
Sure. Let's spin up the window both sides. It's shared screen on Zoom.
I have to share it again.
Yeah, because I shared the Ashley picture. Yep.
That good?
Yes, I think so.
Right.
Slides. Yes.
All right. So it's a pleasure to be here. I have a lot to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk as fast as I can, try to get it all in. I haven't talked to you in 4 years, so it's a lot to talk about. Called this eBird 202 because I'm going to assume that my audience is people who know how to use eBird and want to go a little bit beyond the basics.
Quick question, Ken. Do you want to be interrupted with questions as they appear on the
Yeah,
chat
so
box?
I was saying I have a lot to talk about. I'm going to be talking really fast. I would like to take questions, but I think it's going to be best to hold them just in the interest of time. I'll have a few breakpoints where I might let one question come in. So this is a Monty Python talk. I don't have a theme that goes through the whole talk from beginning to end, but I have a series of disconnected topics, and I'll be doing now for something completely different several times. So last summer, I wrote a post on Facebook that I called Ornithological Forensics, and I got a lot of feedback from people that said they enjoyed reading that. So tonight I have another detective story. I don't know what happened here. I have another detective story. How many people here have ever seen a pine grosbeak? I thought there'd be a few. How many have seen a pine grosbeak in North Carolina? Yeah, I didn't think so. There are some records. There are a series of records of pine grosbeaks in the Carolinas, 12 reports, and 11 of them are within a narrow range of years, 1962 to 1977, and then nothing since then. So what's the significance of those years, 1962, 1977? What else was going on at that time? In 1962, everybody used Roger Terry Peterson's Field Guide to Birds of Eastern North America. It dominated birding even more than Sibley does today, because Sibley at least has competition. Peterson, it was just Peterson. And if you had your Peterson and you wanted to identify a pine grosbeak, here's the plate that you would look at. What's wrong with this plate? Well, Peterson was published in 1947. And in 1947, house finches weren't a thing yet. So he didn't have a house finch on this plate. So let's compare pine grosbeaks and house finches in the Carolinas. So like I said, a series of observations of pine grosbeaks from 1962 through the years up to 1977. House finches, first North Carolina record of house finch, 1962. First Raleigh specimen collected in 1966. There were some winter records. South Carolina had their first record. 1969, first house finch on the Charlotte Christmas count. 1970-72, they were noted as being regular at a feeder in Charlotte. And 1975, first young observed. So in this exact same range of years, we had rare house finches trickling into the state, and people didn't have a field guide to identify them with. Now, obviously, some people were aware and were identifying them, but by and large, I would guess your average birder just didn't know about house finches. And then once house finches were solidly established and reproducing, nobody ever saw another pine grosbeak ever again. So isn't this an interesting coincidence? Could these people have been seeing house finches and identifying them as pine grosbeaks? So let's look at some of their reports. Here's one, 1965, Phil Warren, Wilson, December, studied it from 25 feet away, and he wrote some details. Had distinct wing bars, and it was pink. So what the heck did he see? He wrote a description that matches pine grosbeak and house finch and purple finch and white-winged crossbill. So what did he see? We have no idea what he saw. Does it matter that it was Phil Warren making his reports? What about his reputation? I have no idea who Phil Warren was. So his reputation counts for nothing. So why am I even talking about this? I'm supposed to be talking about eBird. If you take one lesson home from this talk tonight, it is how important it is to write good details on your observations when you see a rare bird and your eBird in it. Don't be like Phil Warren and write a generic description that doesn't nail the identification. And also keep in mind, somebody may actually be looking at your checklist 60 years from now, trying to figure out what the heck you saw. Your reputation counts for nothing because they don't know who you are. So think about writing good descriptions on your eBird checklist. There's another one. This one's even worse. There's absolutely nothing here. The observers know they're purple finches, and they were sure the birds were pine grosbeaks after looking at Peterson's field guide. So this is a just like the picture identification. Just like the picture is the very worst thing that you can say when you're reporting a rare bird. If you say just like the picture, I know that you don't know what you're talking about. There's a saying, the eye can only see what the mind already knows. If you don't know what to look for, you're not going to see it. So if you say it's just like the picture, that tells me you don't know what to look for. I think we all know about beginning birders that can be looking at a house finch and looking at a picture of a purple finch, and they say that's an exact match. And if you know the difference, then you know how to see that it isn't an exact match. So the elements of writing a good description on your eBird checklist are know what to look for it, and write down what you found. So know, look, write, know what you're looking for, look for it, find it, and write down what you found. Now, out of those 12 records, there's one that convinces me, and this is the one, which is actually the 1962 one. 5 pine grosbeaks showed up in Mount Olive, created quite a neighborhood stir. And then down at the bottom, she says white-winged bars and pinkish, just like the other guy said. And then she goes on to say, but the birds we saw were even larger than the even grosbeaks with which they fed. Oh, I totally forgot one other thing I was going to say. So you're all sitting there wondering, well, how would Kent describe a pine grosbeak? So let me go back to that. If I'm writing a description of a rare bird, I'd like to take the approach of comparing it to other birds that it might be confused with. None of the 12 reports of pine grosbeaks in the Carolinas took that approach. Very well, not very much anyway. So I would start by comparing it to other pink finches. Now, if you go back to this Peterson plate, you can see that the pine grosbeak is a lot bigger than the purple finch, and therefore a lot bigger than a house finch. And in fact, I think maybe the true difference is even bigger than it looks like as in Peterson's illustration. A pine grosbeak is 50% longer than a house finch and 2.5 times as heavy. It's a big chunky finch. So I don't see how you could fail to comment on what a big finch this is. Only one of the 12 people did. Also the bill, and again, I don't think Peterson captures the bill very well, but if we go back to this photo, which by the way is not my photo, I wish it were, you can see it has a finch bill, but it's very, very short. I would call it stubby. There's no other finch that has a stubby bill. I don't see how you could fail to look at this bird and not remark upon the stubby bill. Nobody did that. And then the pink, you could say, you know, well, pink is pink, but the head, if you look at the head, it's solid pink all over. Whereas a purple finch and house finch has some dark markings in there. And then finally, if you look, for the people here, if you look, the underparts behind the pink, the background is really gray. None of the other finches have that gray. So there are plenty of things that you could say about your observation of a pine grosbeak if you know that those are things to look for. Okay, so back to this report. She says the birds we saw were even larger than the evening grosbeaks with which they fed. So that is a solid observation. They had side-by-side comparison to evening grosbeaks, and they were larger. That's unambiguous. And in combination with the white wing bars and pinkish color is a diagnostic. So I believe that she really did see a pine grosbeak. Maybe some of the other 11 people saw pine grosbeaks, who knows, but they did not document what they saw in a way that stands the test of time. And not for something completely different. I want to talk about subspecies. Subspecies, what the heck? What's the deal with subspecies? So you're out birding, you're just minding your own business. You see a downy woodpecker, you get out your app and you type in Dowwow, and up pops downy woodpecker and downy woodpecker eastern. What the heck? What is? How do you know what to do? Downy eastern. I don't know what that means. Now, it's some subspecies I hope people are more familiar with, like yellow rumped warbler. I hope everybody knows about the myrtle subspecies and Audubon subspecies. And I want to digress for a minute and point out another thing that's illustrated here. At the bottom of each of these screens, it says, "Can't find your bird." Have you ever seen that? It's there every time that you enter. I have a feeling that people are kind of blind to it because it's down at the bottom. Once in a while, I hear somebody say, well, I had this rare bird and I couldn't put it into eBird because it wasn't on the checklist. I didn't know, it wasn't there. How would they put it? Well, that sounds a whole lot like another way of saying, can't find your bird. If the bird isn't on the checklist, it's that rare, you type in its name at the top or a search string, and then you tap can't find your bird, and that will bring up every kind of bird in the world that has ever lived. Dodo is in there. You could report it. Please don't, but I'm just saying everything is in there. It's accessible. So don't let me hear you couldn't find your bird. But now this could come around and give you a way to shoot yourself in the foot too, which is what's shown in the third column here. And I tried not to single out any particular people, but this actually is a real thing that just happened last week. And I don't mean to pick on the person that did it because it's something that I see frequently, and this is just the latest example. But this person saw a sharp-shinned hawk, photographed it, and then, I don't know, she was excited about it, or I don't know, she had trouble typing it in, I guess. And she accidentally hit, can't find your bird. So up pops up every kind of sharp-shinned hawk in the whole world, North America and South America. And it's just overwhelming. What do I do? I don't, all these, what is all this stuff? I don't know. So when this happens to people, how do they respond? Usually they just pick something at random. So this person picked the one in the middle, sharp-shinned hawk Caribbean, and submitted it. So then I had to write to her and say, well, you know, I don't think you saw a Caribbean sharp-shinned hawk. And she wrote back. That's good. About half the time I never hear back from people that I write to, but she wrote back and said, yeah, she just wanted a sharp-shinned hawk. So here's a lesson, another take-home lesson. If you get one of these long lists and you don't know which one to pick, always pick the thing at the top. If you don't know, pick the one at the top. Now, if you're sure that you saw a white-breasted sharp-shinned hawk and you can back that up, sure, go for it. But if you don't know, pick the one at the top, which is just the plain old sharp-shinned hawk, no special kind of sharp-shinned hawk. So I hope everybody took biology in 9th grade, 10th grade, maybe. I hope everybody knows that all living things are classified in a hierarchical manner. We start with the animal kingdom and phyla and classes. All birds are in the class Aves. And then under classes, we have orders. Passerines is one example of a bird order. And then under orders, we have families, and warblers and sparrows are two examples of families. And then under families, we have species, and yellow-rumped and magnolia are two example warbler species. And song sparrow is an example sparrow species. And this third level in this chart is the level we mostly work with when we're birding species, yellow-rumped warbler, magnolia warbler, song sparrow. But if you want to, you can go one more level below species. That's why you call them subspecies or below species. So for yellow-rumped, we have the Audubon's subspecies, and we have the myrtle subspecies. So this is why you get three choices in eBird. The top choice is on the species line, and then the other choices below that are the subspecies. So which should you do? Should you report subspecies or should you not report subspecies? There are strongly held opinions on both sides of that question. So I'll try just to give you pros and cons. So the pros for identifying subspecies, main pro is scientific value. eBird is all about precisely mapping bird distribution. So why not go the extra step? Instead of just mapping species, map subspecies. And kind of a corollary of that, there can be conservation value. Sometimes there's one subspecies that's endangered where the species isn't. So it's valuable to record where that endangered subspecies is. And then the third pro is just personal preference. Some people just enjoy working with subspecies. And then finally, if there's a split at a later time where subspecies are elevated to full species, eBird will automatically do the split for you. You don't have to take any action on your own. Now the cons, the biggest con in my mind is you probably don't really know how to identify subspecies. Most of the time when you identify a subspecies, you just take in the default. So to go back to that downy woodpecker example, you say, oh, I'm going to report it as an eastern downy woodpecker to be more precise. It's a scientific observation that I saw an eastern downy woodpecker, more precise than just saying downy woodpecker. But the reason you're saying that is that you already have the scientific knowledge that that's the subspecies we have here. So it's circular, you see. So it doesn't really seem very scientific to me. Now, like with the yellow rump warblers, you can really make an observation because there are two choices. But when there's just one choice, you're just taking the default, and I don't see the value in that. I put meadowlarks here as a note to remind myself to give a counter argument to what I just said. We do that kind of default thing with species all the time too. If you see a meadowlark, you can put it down as an eastern. How often do you really look at a meadowlark to see if it might be a western? So, both things to think about. And then, of course, a corollary to this is that subspecies may not really be well defined. Last winter, there was a Nashville warbler that spent the whole winter in Apex. Probably most of you went over there and saw it. Well, I got to thinking, it's not supposed to be here if it's at best, it's just a lagger that didn't migrate. It could just as easily be from California. It could be the California subspecies. So I put some effort into trying to figure out, is it the eastern subspecies and it just didn't migrate, or is it the California subspecies and came wandering over here? And you can't tell. You can't tell them apart. Even if you know where they, even if see them where they belong, you can't. I don't know how they even decided that there are different subspecies. To take a vagrant bird that's out of range, it's undecidable. And then the last con is exactly the same as the last pro. It doesn't matter whether you record subspecies or not. If there's a split, eBird's going to do the split for you. So I've seen eastern meadowlarks in Arizona, and I knew that there are different subspecies out there, the Lilianae subspecies. I never bothered reporting them as the subspecies. At least I don't think I did. Well, last year, that subspecies was split off as a new species, Chihuahua meadowlark. And eBird just changed all eastern meadowlarks in Arizona to Chihuahua meadowlarks. Didn't matter whether you recorded them that way or not. Now, an interesting case just came up almost 24 years ago. I saw a yellow-nosed albatross on one of Brian Pattison's pelagic trips. And now I find out there were two subspecies of yellow-nosed albatross. I didn't know that. It was just yellow-nosed albatross to me. Last month, they split the two subspecies. So we don't have yellow-nosed albatross anymore. We have Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross and Indian yellow-nosed albatross. Indian as in Indian Ocean. Now, in this case, eBird couldn't do that automatic split adjustment that I just talked about because these are South Hemisphere birds. Either one of them is a long, long way from home off the coast of North Carolina. So either one is equally plausible. You can't just assume, oh, it must have been the Atlantic or it must have been the Indian. You have to actually examine the photos if there are any. So I lost a bird off my life list because what they did was put them all as slashes, Atlantic / Indian yellow-nosed albatross, and slashes don't count on your life list. So I wasn't too happy about that. But the one I saw happened to be the first accepted North Carolina record. And so it's written up in the chat by Mike Tove and Brian Pattison. So I went back and read what they published, and sure enough, they identified the subspecies. They identified it as the Atlantic. So I was able to change my observation to Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross and got it back on my life list, my year list, county list. It's everywhere it needs to be. But that's not the usual case. Usually they can assume which form it was when they have to do a split. Okay, so you've made a decision. You want to report subspecies. You don't want to be bothered with subspecies. Well, there's an option for that in the eBird app. I don't know if people know about that. There's a few settings that you can go to. The presentation looks slightly different between Android and iPhone, but I think they both have the same settings. So right in the middle there, there's an option that says show subspecies for data entry. So on the left here, I show that option turned on, and on the right, I show it turned off. So if you have it turned on and you enter yellow-rumped warbler, you get the three choices. You get the full species yellow-rumped warbler and the two subspecies. If you have that option turned off and you enter yellow-rumped warbler, you only see yellow-rumped warbler. It doesn't give you the subspecies, so you don't have to be bothered figuring out. Now, and so that's how I use eBird. I don't ever see subspecies. Okay, I'll take one quick question on this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and talk about another topic, hotspots and personal locations. There are exactly two categories of eBird locations, hotspots and personal locations. Don't let me catch you talking about your personal hotspot. That really gets under my skin. There's no such thing as a personal hotspot. There are hotspots and there are personal locations. If you say hotspot, if you say personal hotspot, that's saying that's both public and personal. It can't be both at the same time. So that tells me you don't really understand about hotspots and personal locations. So first of all, in my opinion, hotspot was a terrible name. They should never have used the name hotspot. They should have called them shared locations, and then we'd be talking about shared locations versus personal locations. So personal locations are private. Hotspots provide a way for birders to collaborate with each other by pooling their checklists, their observations, in a way that is publicly accessible by other birders. So you can look at that. You can look at the observations that people have collaboratively contributed and learn about what birds are seen at a hotspot. So now I want to look at some web pages. Here's an example of a personal location, my yard list. This is a list of all the species that I've seen in my yard, which is not a personal hotspot. It's a personal location, and it's private. You cannot see this list. You cannot see my yard list, and because it's private. And even if I wanted to let you see it, I couldn't. There's no mechanism by which I could let you see it. Also, you can do a list of checklists for a personal location. So here's a list of all the checklists I've done in my yard. I've done 974 eBird checklists in my yard. And here's a list of all of them. Again, you cannot see this list. It's private, strictly private. Now, if you go searching for species, you might come across individual checklists that I've made in my yard, but you can't see this collection of all of the checklists, private. Let's compare that with a hotspot. Here's a hotspot that I think we all know, Brumley North. Hotspots have a list of, they call it sightings, but it's really a list of all the birds that have ever been seen there. So this is analogous to a life list, but it's the hotspot's life list, not any person's life list. And this is a collaborative list then, because all the different birders that go there have collaborated in producing this very long list, which is much longer than the list of any one person. And you can also, just as I could for my yard, you can do a list of all the checklists that have ever been done at Brumley North. And here's that list. And again, but this is not the list, these are not the lists of any one person, but the lists of everybody that has gone there. So because people have pooled their data, we can do things like have this illustrated checklist. Have you ever looked at this? It's up in the upper left-hand corner of every hotspot page. And this loads slowly, so I can take a quick question if anybody has one. Okay, I'll just wait for it to load.
When you search for new visual slope, I want to see all the birds that come out of the sea. All the different places to come.
No, no. Okay, so this is the illustrated checklist for Brumley North. And just like that other list I showed you, it has a list of all the species that everybody collectively has ever seen at Brumley North. Nobody in this room has seen a snow goose, but somebody, actually it was Bo, saw a snow goose once, so that's on this list. If you just did private lists every time you went to Brumley North, you wouldn't even know that there'd been a snow goose seen there. We can see that Canada geese are seen mostly through the year, except they disappear June and July and then start coming back. We can see that wood ducks are seen through most of the year, except in midwinter and so on. And again, we can see this because people have collaborated by pooling their checklists, and all these, the data and all the pooled checklists let us make this bar chart. Another nice feature is there's a photograph. Not only is this a photograph of each species that's been seen at Brumley North, but all of the photographs have been taken at Brumley North. So that's kind of nice. If you go to a hotspot that's lightly birded, you'll see this list of photos may be pretty sparse, like Brumley doesn't have a wild turkey photo yet, but at a heavily birded hotspot like Brumley North, it's pretty complete. Okay, so personal locations versus hotspots. There are many cases where personal location is appropriate. Your yard list is a classic example. Or if you just go any old place that where people don't go very much, then yeah, it's going to be a personal location. You're driving down the highway and you see a loggerhead shrike on the wire, you're going to stop. That's a personal location. But if you go birding someplace where a hotspot is configured, I really think that you should use the hotspot as your location. So another case to consider is, what if you go to a hotspot and use personal locations anyway? To look into that, we can pick a species. That I picked Carolina wren, a species that's probably going to be on every checklist. And then look at checklists from the area around Brumley North. Okay, these map markers, not quite, no, I didn't load the map for some reason. There we go. Well, I don't know, let's try refreshing the page. There we go. So each of these map pins represents a location where people have submitted one or more checklists that have a Carolina wren on them. And there's a whole bunch of map pins here. So the map pin that represents the hotspot is this big red one down here in the parking lot. So the hotspot pin is large and the personal location pins are smaller. There's another thing that took me a really long time to figure out. The hotspot pin has a little symbol in the middle of it. I finally figured out that's a flame. The hotspot pin has a flame on it. But then now there's a whole cluster of personal locations around the hotspot pin. What's that all about? I would call those mistakes, personally. You go to Brumley North, you get out of your car, you start your checklist, you make that the location. A lot of times people just, they're not paying attention, or they don't even have the concept of a hotspot. I don't know. They create a personal location there instead of selecting the hotspot. What? Hold on to that thought. So I consider that, I consider that to be carelessness. I think if you're gonna put your map pin in the parking lot, you should be using the hotspot. Now, let me show you something else here. If we go way over here, here's a map pin on the east side of University Station Road. So, well, fine, somebody went birding there and they did a checklist. But if you open that map pin and you look at what they call their location, they said Brumley North. So they went birding over here on Brumley North, and they put their map pin way over on the east side of University Station Road. That is clearly carelessness and very, very common. You see that all over the place. Now then, what about all of these map pins that are scattered out all over Brumley North? Well, again, I'm sure that some of these are just carelessness. People just put their map pin in the old place and they don't even think about using the hotspot. Now you could say, well, you know, if I'm way over here at Silo Pond and I see some birds there, it's kind of, it doesn't feel quite right to map them back to the hotspot, which is considered to be in the parking lot. So you might want to, you might want to have my location be over there where the birds are. And that makes sense if you stay within a really small area to do your count. If you put your map pin over here at Silo Pond and you still go all over Brumley North, then you know you might as well have used the hotspot. Now there's one other thing, and that is if you're participating in the North Carolina Bird Atlas, that's the kind of thing that they want you to do. In fact, they say if you're atlasing, do not use hotspots. That's the thing I really hate about the Bird Atlas, but they say, all right, they say do not use, but there's a caveat. You have to be doing, if you're not, you have to be doing something else to make it worthwhile not to use the hotspot. And that is you have to do short distance checklists. So if you're atlasing, if you're going atlasing to Brumley North and you use a personal location because they said don't use hotspots, but you use your personal location for the entirety of Brumley North, then that's defeating the purpose. So if you're atlasing, you want to do something like do a checklist through the cemetery connector, stop that checklist, start a new checklist while you go past the lower pond, stop that checklist, start a new checklist while you go up by Silo Pond, stop that checklist, start a fourth checklist while you go back down by the barn, and so on. You have to do multiple short distance checklists to justify using personal locations at a hotspot or anywhere really if you are atlasing. And that's what a lot of these points are. Like this one right here belongs to Ross McKenna. He's out there atlasing. He's doing what he's been told to do. So good for you. Let me think here. So that's hotspots. Now I'm going to talk about reviewing. This chart is very subtly divided into a top half and a bottom half, top two rows and bottom two rows. So when you submit a checklist, it has a lot of species on it, and we call one species on a checklist an observation. So you have a bunch of observations, and each observation is either not flagged rare or it is flagged rare. So either or, one or the other. If it's a common bird, it's not going to be flagged rare. If it's a rare bird, it's going to be flagged rare immediately. Also, immediately it's considered unreviewed because mostly review involves human intervention, which obviously isn't there immediately. So your records start out being unreviewed. If it's a common bird, not flagged rare, it's immediately confirmed and we're done with it. We don't spend any time on observations of common birds. If it's rare, it remains in unconfirmed status until a reviewer looks at it. So now we go to the bottom two rows. After a reviewer has looked at it, it becomes reviewed. If the reviewer says, yeah, okay, you wrote a good description, you have a good photo, whatever, it's confirmed. If they say, well, I have questions. A reviewer should get back in touch with you to give you another chance to follow up. And I know a lot of reviewers don't do that. I personally, with few exceptions, always give people a chance to follow up. If you still don't convince me after the follow-up, then it becomes unconfirmed. So a few things about this chart. I wanted to show you the two parameters, reviewed, unreviewed, and confirmed, unconfirmed, with 4 combinations, and all 4 of those combinations make sense and are common. So these are the 4 combinations. And then about the disposition of observations, we never discard a record. We cannot take anything off of your checklist. We cannot take anything off of your life list. If you report a dodo, it's on your life list. We can't take it. We can't take your dodo away. It goes into the database permanently. Even if we know that you lied, it goes into the database. It's there forever. We don't ever discard a record. It's just confirmed or unconfirmed. Confirmed means it goes into the database in the way that's accessible. Anybody can find it by searching for it. Unconfirmed means it's in the database, but it's never going to be presented in a search result. So it's hard to find unconfirmed records because you can't search for them. So the $1 million question that everybody wants an answer to is, how do I know if my report is reviewed or unreviewed, or confirmed or unconfirmed? Although I would just say another interesting question is, why should I care? I don't really know their thinking. I haven't ever seen them explain it, but for whatever reason, the people at eBird Central have decided not to be transparent about this. So they don't give you a way to find out the status of your observations directly, but there are indirect ways. And one of those is to check the map, by which I mean search for the record. So let's see, I want to go back. You remember when I was telling you that whole story about the yellow-nosed albatross, and I got it back. I changed it to Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross, and everything was fine. It's on my life list. That's an unconfirmed record, and I'm not that upset about it. So let's look at Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross in Dare County. Being a little stubborn. There we go. Okay, there are only 2 map pins on the map for Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross. Now, I happen to know that before that split that happened last month, there were a bunch of map pins for the old species yellow-nosed albatross. But when they started switching them to either the slash or to one of the new species, that threw them all back into unreviewed status. So they've all gone back to being unreviewed, unconfirmed. I'm not actually privy to what's going on there, but they're awaiting a reviewer to make some decision. So I know where my map pin should be, and it's not on this map. And I also know that all those other map pins aren't there. So if you look for your observation on the map and you find it under one of these map pins, you know that it's confirmed. If you don't find it, you know that it's unconfirmed. What you don't know is you don't know whether it's unconfirmed because it's unreviewed or if it's unconfirmed because it's been reviewed. Now, if your observation is in the Carolinas and it's within the last 7 days, you can go to the Carolina Bird Club sightings page. That gives you a little more information. So thinking back to that chart with the four rows with the four combinations. So this page never deals with the top row, the common birds that are immediately accepted. This is just rare birds. And it's not going to show the bottom row that have been reviewed and unconfirmed, because those are not public. So it deals with the two middle rows, the ones that are not yet reviewed and unconfirmed, and those that are reviewed and confirmed. So some of these observations have a little green check mark next to them. The green check mark indicates a confirmed sighting. If it doesn't have the check mark, it's unreviewed. So this adds the ability to tell whether it has been reviewed or not, which you didn't get from just looking at the map. Now, there's one more thing. If you have media, a photographic sound recording, you can get some extra information by looking at your media. So let's see, this is the end of my PowerPoint. I'm going to go back to the web. And okay, I want to go to Explore, search photos and sounds. And I want to search for Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross. Where the location is Dare County. There are only 3 photos. There are only 3 photos of Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross in North Carolina. And all 3 of those are from one of the map pointers that I showed you on that previous map. But now there's one more thing we can do. You ever notice this more filters thing in the middle? You click on that, and it gives you a bunch of things that you can choose to select categories of photos. And over here on the right, it says review status. The default is to show only photos of confirmed observations. But you can also have it include unconfirmed, which is everything, or you can have it just show unconfirmed. So let's look at unconfirmed photos. And oh, wait, there we go. There's a whole bunch of them, whole bunch of photos of Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross in Dare County. And they all say unconfirmed. It's right there, unconfirmed. So, you know, if you see that on your photo, you know that it's still pending review. If it says unconfirmed, that means pending review, unreviewed, unconfirmed. If it had been reviewed and unconfirmed, it would say something different. It would say reviewed and not public. And you would only see that on your own photos. You would never see somebody else's photo that says reviewed and not public, because that's what not public means. It means nobody else can see it. So this tells you exactly what status your observation is in if you have a photo. And now I want very quickly to just say a couple more things about photos. Turn off these selectors here. This is just the entry photo page. If you have submitted at least 100 eBird checklists in the previous calendar year, then when you look at photos, you'll see this little thing that says report under the photo. If you didn't submit 100 checklists, you won't see that. So if you want to be able to do this next year, be sure you get your 100 checklists in by the end of 2023. And what that means is if you're going through looking at photos and you see one that's misidentified, like see that house sparrow, so well, that's not a house sparrow, that's a chickadee. You click on the report there, and this little thing comes up, and you can check one species, and you type in what species you think it is, and you submit it, and then it goes to a reviewer, which, and if it's in this local area, that's me. And I really appreciate it when people do that. Please do this kind of thing, because I never look at house sparrow photos. They don't get reviewed, so I'd never know if somebody. I mean, they might, sometimes people, they didn't even misidentify it. They just put the photo on the wrong species. That happens a lot. Okay, but of course this really is identified correctly, so I'll cancel out of that. And the last thing that I want to talk about is to look at my unconfirmed photos. I have a lot of them. So there's this little button here. It says My Media. If you click on that, it shows you your own photos. So then I'm going to go under More Filters. And we're going to do Unconfirmed. And I have a whole bunch of unconfirmed photos, and here's an example of some that say that reviewed and not public. So you can always see your own photos. You can't take your own photos away from you. So even though this is reviewed and unconfirmed, I can still see it because it's mine. You can't see it. You can go into eBird and you can search for photos that Kent Fiala took in Arizona, and you'll see my newer ones, but you won't see these older ones. So this is a situation that I haven't talked about yet. I wanted to put in these photos from trips I did to Arizona back in 2006 and 2007. That was long before I was eBirding, and I wasn't birding the eBird way. I wasn't keeping precise records on my locations. I just did a day list, all the birds I saw that day. So I don't have good detail, good location detail for these birds. So I just put them in by the county. You can just say the county is the location, and they let you do that, but they don't want to use that data. It's just for your own satisfaction. And those are immediately reviewed automatically. This is a rare case where review doesn't involve a human interaction. They're immediately reviewed and marked unconfirmed, so they're called not public because they don't have good location data. But these birds still count on my life list, even though they're unconfirmed. They still count on your life list. As a reviewer, we cannot take something off of your life list. But so now I want to just look at my unconfirmed records from the last 10 years, which is a choice here. And I have 3 from my trip to Brazil in 2022, which not surprising that I might have misidentified some birds in Brazil. Now, these birds were not flagged when I submitted them. I've not heard from a reviewer. I guess they don't have an active reviewer there. So I know that these were flagged by somebody that did that thing that I just showed you, where you click on the report and you say it's misidentified. So, and so I don't have a way to see what that person thought they were. So I ran it. What would you do? I ran it through Merlin. And I didn't just take Merlin's word for it. I looked them up in the field guide down. And yeah, this is one of those cases, you know, where I was saying back at the beginning, know what to look for. Well, this is a case where I don't really know what to look for. The bird that I called it and the bird that it's supposed to be look pretty darn similar to me. But so I'm going to show you how to correct these. I see, you know, I frequently have to write to people and tell them that they need to correct the identification of photos. And I see people screw that up all the time. So I'm going to show you the right way to do that. So first of all, I'm going to fix this Finalto wood creeper. And first you have to get to your checklist. I'm gonna have to move this thing out of the way. In this view, which you get by tapping on the photo from that first screen, then you get this different viewer, and this has the checklist down here in the lower right. So you open up the checklist, and there are two different ways that you can do this. There's the old way, which always works and can be done under either manage media or edit species. And there's a new way that can only be done under managed media in certain circumstances. So first I'm going to do the edit species way. And I forgot, what was that species? Panalto wood people. Okay, so this is supposed to be a buff-throated wood creeper. So what I see people do all the time, I tell them, you know, that's the wrong identification. You got to change it. And the email that I sent has instructions. Of course, nobody reads the instructions. What people do very frequently is just delete this. I could just delete my Panalto wood creeper. It's wrong. I get it off of there. But they don't put the right subspecies in. It's just gone. Or another thing that people do is they delete the Panalto wood creeper, which also deletes the photos, and then they put the right species in, but they don't have the photos anymore because they don't want to go find them and re-upload them again. Well, that's such a shame because it's so easy to do it the right way. They just what you want to do is change the species, and what do you know? We have buttons over here that say change species. It's amazing. Now there are different scenarios. Sometimes there's only one photo that's wrong. So maybe one of these photos is right and the other one's wrong. So in that case, I would use the change species next to the photo that I want to correct. Or sometimes I really did see a Panalto wood creeper. It's just that these aren't photos of what I saw. And in that case, I might also want to just move the media. In this case, I want to move the whole record to another species. So I'm going to use the change species button that's up here by the species name. So I click on that and it says, what's the right species? And it's buff-throated wood creeper. And again, I can choose to move my whole observation or only my media. I want to move my whole observation. And I hit change and it's done. There it is. It's under buff-throated wood creeper, and I preserved the photos. I didn't have to upload them again. And hit save. Okay, now I'm going to use a. Let's see, what is that? Screen was on. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the beginning. So I'm looking in my media. Last 10 years. And unconfirmed. That should be gone. Why isn't it? I must have failed to save it. Anyway, I'm going to show you the other way to correct the sepia capped flycatcher. So again, I have to find the checklist and find that bird on it. It's pretty far down. Actually, no, not yet. So for this one, I'm going to do it under manage media, not under edit species. So we're going to manage media, and then I have to scroll way down to that photo. Okay, now there's a different circumstance here. I want to change the sepia-capped flycatcher to an olive yellow flatbill. Well, if I look a little bit further down, I already have yellow olive flatbill on here. So I want to move the photo from one species to another species that's already on my list. Also, I want to keep the sepia-capped flycatcher because we did see it. I got the wrong species. So I could do this with the change species button. See there's a change species button. But another way to do it is just to grab the picture with the mouse and drag it down there to where it goes. Let's see, it's not. Dragging is a little harder on a laptop than it is on a desktop. Let's see if I can make this work. Okay, I'll drag it down there and drop it. And bam, there it is. I'm moving from sepia-capped flycatcher to yellow olive flatbill. And I save it. And I say done. And I think that did it this time. I don't know why it didn't. And we come to the end. So now I take some questions if we have them.
So we drove down and saw the flamingos, and they're labeled on eBird as escape findings.
Yeah,
So what's how does that? Well, I mean, how does that work?
Normally any flamingo in North Carolina is going to be an escapee. So that's the default. That's how it's configured. And there's not really a good justification to change that because this is a one-off situation. It's not going to be repeated. So they all get that by default, but the reviewers are manually changing that for every observation. So if you look back at older observations, you'll see that they are marked as, I guess they're marked as native. So eventually your observation will be corrected. You just have to wait for the reviewer to get to it.
Well, I had a weirdness happen that I wanted to information. And the weirdness I was looking at my life list. And we just over in France. And at the top of my life list, newest bird on my list is European starling.
Yeah.
It's not exactly a new bird on my list.
If you see a bird that, if you have a bird on your life list that is not native, like a starling, then the first time you see it in its native range, it'll move to the top of your life list because it just the date to the first time you saw it in its native range.
Yeah. On your picture of the multiple hotspots in Brumley North, there were some that were small but red. What were those?
First of all, you know, there were not multiple hotspots. There were
I'm sorry,
multiple
you're
personal
right.
locations.
And multiple.
The red pins contain observations from the last 30 days. The blue ones are older than 30 days.
Okay. The second question is, we were in Thailand several months ago, and among the hotspots, there were some other locations very close to the hotspots scattered along the highway. Like every few hundred feet, somebody planted another location. Is there any way that a reviewer or anyone else can say, this should be on the hotspot rather than in this particular place?
Well, you can tell people, but you can't make them do
You
it.
can't make them do it. They can
Yeah.
do it themselves.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
okay. Because it was a very crowded map.
Mm,
We run into two situations. One is countries like Taiwan, where there's so many hot spots and you're tapping along, you're not gonna do it in 200 yards. Locations, sorry. No, they're hot spots.
Some of them will have spots, yes.
And you don't know which ones to pick. And so I end up doing a personal location just because there's so many. And then you get to other places where there's not very many at all and you want to break it up. And I can't use them. Just not.
yeah, sometimes you just have to use your judgment. Any others?
This came up today, actually, out at Roland View. We were standing at Roland View, a pretty good group of people looking at a long-tailed duck that was judged to be in Durham County, and some scoters that were close to Salmon Beach that were judged to be in Wake County. You're making a list standing in Durham, where would you count this scoter?
Well, there's a very clear policy on this. It's on the eBird website. You record your location as where you are. Whatever county you're in, that's where you report the bird, no matter where the bird is.
So theoretically, if you're standing at Four Corners, and you see a really cool bird in one state, you can walk around in a circle and get out.
Yeah, they say if you want to do that, you should do a complete checklist for the main place where you're birding. And then you can do an incomplete checklist for the other location.
When I was at the workshop on Atlasin, and one issue I've had with recording birds like in Northampton County is that I'll try to create a location and I'll get it, it'll go into a loop where it's updating and it will never update the data. And then I can't really use the list because it's in this continuous mode. I don't know why that message occurs. Personally, I don't see why I should have to update the birds like we've seen if I just do that per spot a couple of, farmer earlier.
Yeah, I've heard of, I haven't ever experienced myself, but I've heard of situations like that. And, I don't know what to say.
One person suggested simply turn off the phone and turn it back on and then it's serious. But yeah, it work.
There's a couple of questions on the Zoom.
Okay.
So one is someone saying that their sighting is not confirmed by the reviewer, that they did not get an email, the message from the reviewer. They were wondering if there's a way to find out why the record was not accepted.
Well, if you know who the reviewer is, you can ask them. There's not. Well, again, that's not public knowledge. So no, maybe you could ask somebody that might know, or I don't know.
Okay. And the second question had to do with hotspots. If you think that the location of a hotspot is incorrect and should be placed somewhere else, who should be contacted for issues like that?
Well, there is a hotspot reviewer, and if they're talking about the state of North Carolina, that is Shelley Rutkin. So they can write to Shelley Rutkin.
I think that's everything for this game. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ken.
That's great.
Jim, do you want to talk about December and the schedule with?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're still unmuted, aren't we?
Leave your name tags. Yes, please.
Yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Our next meeting is in January. And it's Steve Schultz on Madagascar, I think is the meeting. I forget the date, but you can check the website. So please join us. And actually, did I say that's on Zoom? The January meeting is on Zoom. The February will be another hybrid meeting. Okay, I think that's a wrap.
The next